Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. An explosive lawsuit accuses North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore of destroying the marriage of a former Apex town councilman. Scott Lassiter says Moore used his power to coerce his wife into a relationship that lasted more than 3 years. Moore says the relationship was proper and denies the allegation that he abused his position as one of the state's most powerful politicians. WRAL state government reporters Paul Specht and Travis Fain have been out front on the story, and they join us now. First off, this episode is being recorded on Friday, June 23rd, and this is a fast-developing story, so be sure to check out nccapital.com for updates. Travis, I want to start with you. First, what does this lawsuit allege, and what does Moore have to say about it?
Like you said, it alleges that the speaker ruined this marriage by dating a woman that was married to Scott Lassiter, who is an former Apex town councilman, and that they had this off-again, on-again relationship from 2019 to very recently. And what the speaker says is that, hey, I thought they were separated. I was told they were separated. What Jamie Lassiter, the wife, says is we were separated, and there's been some back and forth between the couple that has played out in an unusual way in the media. And what's kind of more important from the aspect of the public good is there's an accusation in the lawsuit that the speaker, who is obviously one of the more powerful people in this state, used that power to kind of coerce this woman into this relationship and others into relationships. And she's a state worker, so I mean, he has some control over the budget. He denies all of this. He says, no, I have never used my power to coerce anyone into any sort of relationship or to keep that relationship going or threaten somebody if they break up with me. This is all coalesced into this lawsuit that is accusing the speaker of alienation of affection, which is kind of this unusual thing. I think only a few states allow you to sue over it, but it basically says if your marriage is ruined because of an affair, you can sue the other person. And Mr. Lassiter is seeking $200,000 from the speaker.
Now, Paul, you were the first to report on this. Usually when we report on lawsuits, the parties are tight-lipped, lawyers say no comment, and you're sort of left to interpret these legal documents. That hasn't been the case here, right?
Right. You know, usually there are a lot of lawsuits in North Carolina, and they typically come on a weekday, and often we know the parties involved and go to them and say, hey, can you help us out with a comment, explain this? And they say, nah, we're not going to comment. In this case, not only did this lawsuit break on a weekend, but when we reached out to some of the parties involved, they were ready. Tim Moore, he gave us a comment Sunday night when this lawsuit hit. His attorney gave us a separate comment on this lawsuit. And then we reached out to Jamie Lassiter, the woman involved in this whole lawsuit and this whole love triangle, if you will. And she said this lawsuit is defamatory. She had very strong words, and that her marriage had been a nightmare. So this is, the lawsuit is explosive enough on its own. But then when the parties are ready to come to the press, if you will, and say, let me tell you what I think of this, that sort of, speaks to the gravity of the allegations in the lawsuit.
So by the end of Sunday night, we really had heard from all sides. We've got Scott Lassiter's lawsuit, which explains where he's coming from. We've got a statement from Speaker Moore, and we have a statement from Jamie Lassiter, Scott's wife, but it didn't stop there.
That's right. It turns out that was only the beginning. In the next day or two, Speaker Moore started giving interviews. We obtained some documents, and then Travis and I both started getting phone calls.
Well, that sounds like a really good place to take a break. When we come back, we'll hear more about those documents and those phone calls. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporters Paul Specht and Travis Fain about a new lawsuit facing North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore. Paul, those documents you mentioned before the break, what do they say and how could they figure into the case?
Well, the two most important things in this case are the state of Scott and Jamie Lassiter's marriage and then the timing of when Tim Moore comes into the picture, if you will. The first document we received was an apology letter from Scott Lassiter to his wife in January of this year. It's 3 pages long, and He wrote it, he says, as part of a marital counseling exercise where he lists out things that that he feels bad for and is apologizing for, and things that they said that Jamie wanted to hear. One of those things was, quote, an extramarital affair. That's what's listed in this letter. And so naturally, that begs the question, like, okay, well, could Jamie have been happy if Scott had an extramarital affair, right? That's the question on everyone's minds. When we asked Scott Lassiter about that, he and his attorney said, no, that's not what people might think. It was not a sexual relationship with a woman outside of his marriage. Scott Lassiter was referring to a phone call he made to his ex-girlfriend that upset Jamie. She used the word extramarital affair, and so he repeated that in the letter to, I guess, make her happy, to apologize for what had happened. And of course, when we reached out to Jamie Lassiter about this, she texted me back and said, please, that is a lie. So that's the first thing that we got, was this apology letter with competing narratives about what's in it.
And that's important because Scott Lassiter is trying to prove that Tim Moore is the reason why the relationship went south.
Right. If Scott Lassiter proves that the marriage was happy, or that they were working on it, and that Tim Moore disrupted that, then he could potentially win his case. That definitely gives him better odds.
And the second document seems to raise questions about the chronology of all of this, right?
Right. Scott Lassiter claims that he and Jamie were happily married, and until he found out that Jamie had a relationship with Speaker Tim Moore this past December 2022. Well, in her statement to WRAL on Sunday, Jamie said that they had been separated for years. So that obviously raises the question of, well, just how happy were they? And, if Tim Moore entered the picture, was it when they were happy or when they were unhappy, right? That's the question it raises. Well, we obtained a note that Scott Lassiter wrote for Jamie back in 2019. It says, on May 24th, Jamie Lassiter moved out, signed Scott Lassiter, June 1st, 2019. So I'm paraphrasing. That's not the exact wording, but that's basically what it says. We wondered, okay, so does this note mean that they were separated for a time? And why did he write it? Well, Scott Lassiter's attorneys say Scott wrote that at Jamie's request on June 1st, but not because she was moving out, they say, because she was moving back in, and they were attempting to reconcile, and that was something that she asked for. So they are saying this is another attempt on Scott's part, in good faith, to try to keep the marriage together. And it was not a sign of her moving out, but of her something that he did for her when she moved back in at her request. And obviously, the attorneys for Scott Lassiter will try to illustrate, hey, we patched things up, or we were working on patching things up back in 2019. And at some point, that year, Tim Moore says he entered the picture.
And while Paul was getting these documents, Travis, you were also hearing from parties in the case and their acquaintances too, right?
Yeah, so I had known Scott Lassiter because he ran briefly for a state legislative seat, announced, then things changed, he didn't run. So I had texted him and, tried to get open communication going and say, we're writing about this. We're going to need to hear from you on various things. And then my phone started ringing, I guess it was Tuesday night, and it was clearly people that he had asked to basically call me and vouch for him. And say, I, went to a party and Scott and Jamie Lassiter were there. I went to this event and they seemed to be a happy couple. Basically trying to make the point that, hey, Tim Moore should have known they were not separated. Tim Moore says Jamie Lassiter told him they were separated, but it was obvious that they were not. In one case, it was the former mayor of Apex who called me out of the blue and said, I went to a Christmas party at their house and they were there and they seemed happy and Jamie Lassiter's father was there and everything seemed fine. I was shocked to find that anyone thought they were separated. So, it kind of speaks to this PR offensive that we're talking about where people would call me up and say, I hear you have questions for me. And I'd say, who Who are you? I don't know. And that's what had happened.
Well, and it turned out that we had some footage ourselves here at WRAL that supported some of this. They walked together in what was it, the Cary Christmas Parade this past year. And we had that. It just so happened in our archives.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, it's not that unusual we don't know what's going on in people's lives and in people's marriage, and that seems to have been the case here, that they were to the public, they were acting happy, and maybe were less so.
And Paul, there were some themes there that seem to echo what Scott Lassiter's lawyers are telling you, right? They're painting this picture of this happy marriage.
Right. They sent us texts purportedly showing Jamie telling Scott that she loved him in late 2022. In turn, Jamie disputed that and sent me a text showing where she appears to be putting up boundaries with Scott as recently as March of this year. So they're both obviously trying to get the public's sympathy here, using important documents in their marriage, text messages, even friends, as you heard Travis say, calling us to tell us about their reputation in the community. So I asked an attorney about this. I said, does it matter? Does it matter the timing of all this? And, if they were unhappy years ago, does that matter when Tim Moore enters the picture? And she said the most important thing is, were they happy or on track to working things out when Moore entered the picture? And that's the biggest question we have remaining, is when was their first date? When was their first encounter in a romantic way? And Moore himself has said it was 2019, the same year Jamie alleges that her husband had an affair, and the same year we know that note says she moved out. We just don't know Moore's relationship to all that and how closely all that overlapped.
Now, Travis, you mentioned that the legal strategy is somewhat a dated one, and it's still on the books in North Carolina. Is there any chance, given Moore's involvement in the case, that we'll see a change in the law?
He would certainly like to see it change. He told reporters, got this very question and said, now as someone who's been victimized by it, because of course he feels very much attacked by this and innocent, that he would like to see the law change. Of course, we have two chambers. We have the House and we have the Senate, and the head of the state Senate is a man named Phil Berger, and he was asked, should this law change? And he said, no, I think it's a fine law and we should keep it. So, I mean, it would be a long way to go to get it changed.
So what happens next?
Well, this lawsuit plays out in a kind of public and sad way. I mean, this is all really, frankly, hard to watch and hard to chronicle. And the important things, though, the questions are, what does Tim Moore do? Does he use his power in these relationships? And I don't think we have the final answer to that. I mean, he has denied it repeatedly, but it's still worth asking. And then there's also the question of how this all affects the legislative session, which is wrapping up and rolling. There's some really, really big issues, including teacher salaries, tax rates, all sorts of money and policy issues that lawmakers, Tim Moore chief among them, have to finish negotiating to finish this legislative session. And if Tim Moore is busy dealing with all this and getting questions every day about all this, how does that change the policies, the laws, the budget we all kind of live with going forward? Because these negotiations happen on a very personal level at the state legislature, and Tim Moore's involved in all of them.
I think it's important to note, too, that the attorneys you and I have spoken with, both involved in this case and who are just onlookers, have told us usually it does not get this far. People do not let it get to the public eye like this, which is why another reason it's so shocking.
Yeah, Moore has said he's planning a countersuit, too, so it will get even more complicated.
Well, I know you'll both be on top of this story, as you have been from the start. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
That's WRAL state government reporters Paul Specht and Travis Fain. For their coverage of this case, visit nccapital.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.